met you at Old Garage of Red Ferraris, what it is about Ferrari or the Zagato or whatever you want to talk about.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Thank you very much. So with this thing, I don't have much to say about this, really. Maybe I'll let Winston comment on this, but we just saw Phil Hill and Jean de Bienne up there winning Sebring, which is a very special race and special guys. And in 1997 was the 50th anniversary of Ferrari. And at that time, I had a Ferrari that was known as 002C. And 002C may or may not have been the first Ferrari. It was a cycled fendered, very primitive, very early 12-cylinder, 5-speed car that was early and primitive. And so it was going to go to the 50th anniversary, and the Ferrari was having, and it was going to be a week-long event. And before that, I was going to take it on the Mille Miglia. So for all of us in Los Angeles, Phil Hill was one of our guys. You know, we saw him all the time. He was at every event. He was with us, and he was Phil. And we took Phil for granted every day in town here. So at any rate, I invited Phil to drive with me in the Mille Miglia, on the 50th anniversary of Ferrari, in the first Ferrari. And he had had some bad experiences with others in the Mille Miglia and driving. And he had refused to do that, but in the end, he said okay to me. And he said, two restrictions. One, I'm going to do all the driving. Two, we're not going to do that silly timing thing in the milling. So I said, fine, let's go. Now, I reluctantly gave up the driving, but I just assumed that at the end of the day, I'd get a few minutes behind the wheel. And this was in '97 when the Mille Miglia was a 3-day event. So it was up very early, very long and stressful days, late night driving in the darkness, trying to find your hotel room, getting a couple of hours of sleep, and then back in the car. Jim's done it, Bruce has done it, and those who have done it during that period of time, it was very stressful. Phil was 70 years old, I was 50 years old, and off we went. And this being the Ferrari weekend, it was clearly my most memorable automotive and Ferrari memory in my lifetime, and I didn't know that going into it. So in town, in America, Phil was not that popular. He wasn't a great hero. In Italy, he was the man. He was it. So as soon as we arrived, there were people in front of him every single minute, asking for a photo, asking for an autograph, constantly. He couldn't move. And he was gracious every single moment. He was nice to everybody. And he was taking photographs and on and on. So the car was difficult to be in, a long ride, and it was blowing fuses. We were embarrassed a little bit. Phil would take the hood off and change the fuse, and off we'd go again. It was late at night, and Phil had owned an AC 2900 Spider, which was a race car. Famously, he paid $1,500 for it. So maybe you know that, remember that story. Anyway, it was owned by Bill Seri. Just so happens that Bill had that car in the Mille Miglia. And I had an agreement with Phil because I hadn't really rebuilt my Ferrari engine. I said, let's keep the revs under 7,000 so we don't have a mechanical. He said, fine, that'll be fine with me. Until he saw the 2.9 with Bill Seri driving. He could hear this car. The rev counter on our car immediately went to 10,000. So anyway, we played with that for a while, and just the whole weekend, 3 days of being shoulder to shoulder with the great guy Phil Hill was a lifetime experience. His wife Alma and my wife were out and went shopping and went to Venice, and Phil was so concerned he couldn't get a hold of Alma. And he said, I can't find her. I said, Phil, don't worry. MasterCard has called our house 3 times right now, so I think they're okay. They're going just fine. And throughout the entire weekend, Phil was entertaining and gracious to everybody. You come through Bologna, and then you go to Modena on that road, whatever it's called. And at the time, we were having lunch at the Scaglietti parking lot. It's the only, and so the 002C had no mufflers on it, so you could make a lot of noise with that car. That was the only time when Phil announced his arrival, going into the Scaglietti parking lot where all the Ferrari people were. And they knew he was coming. And in Italy, they call him Fio. And for the hour from Bologna to Maranello, you could just hear feel. Everybody was anticipating his arrival. So as we pulled into that parking lot, he revved it up, made lots of noise, announced his arrival, and shut the car off, and everybody was there from the factory to see Phil again. And it was the women and the mechanics from the racing division, and it was a wonderful, beautiful, memory, and seeing them all come together there. And then we drove late into the night, as you know, and we came back to Brescia. And then the next morning, early on Sunday morning, you probably get in at midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then there's a award ceremony. And so we got up, and they gave Phil a special little award, and his very good friend, Jean de Bienne, who was not well at the time, showed up, and it was Phil, Jean de Bienne, and me, and Jenny, and Alma, and in there for this celebration, they gave Phil this little trophy, and he and Jean de Bienne presented it to me. And I have it upstairs in one of the rooms here at the museum. So it was an extraordinary lifetime experience, and all about Ferrari. And then I took it to the 50th anniversary of Ferrari. Phil didn't stay for that, which was an unbelievable experience. In those days, Ferrari never planned ahead, never gave you much information ahead of time. So most Americans didn't go. But I went, and a few other Americans, but it turned out to be an unbelievable experience. Basically, Ferrari gave you Italy for about 10 days. And it started in Rome, and all the cars were put in a stadium there. And then they had all the Formula One cars racing through the streets. Then you drove on the Mille Miglia route north, ended up in Maranello, put all the cars in Fiorano, and on the hillside there were 100 rental cars. And they said, go take one and use it for the rest of the week. And you had your cars in there. And we went to Pavarotti's place one night, and I had my real experience with who was running Ferrari at the time. Montezemolo. So Montezemolo was a difficult person, right? And he was at his height, winning everything, and he was Mr. Ferrari. So on Saturday night was the final night in Maranello. And so Montezemolo was blessing everybody, basically, and he was what he was at the time. So we had to go from the track to the church in town, where he was actually going to appear in church and bless everybody for the city. So he needed a ride over, so they chose my car and me. So the car is that wasn't that well known. It's certainly not a beautiful thing. Didn't know me. And so they put him in my car. I was the driver, and he wasn't exactly happy about that. He's used to being surrounded by an infinite number of police and that, and he had two little scooters, that were kind of guarding us. So anyway, we drove from the track over to this church parking lot, and there was no eye contact. There was no communication between the two of us. He was not happy. He was not happy the way he was being treated, and not happy the way he was going to enter. So anyway, the car could be very noisy. So as I approached the church and the square, I started to rev the engine. And everybody was just, here comes Montezemolo. I was announcing his arrival with lots of noise. I pulled into the parking lot at speed, spun the car around a couple of times, shut it off, and everybody went crazy. Everybody. First time he looked at me, great smile, and he said, "You come with me." So we both went up into the church, and he came and spoke and blessed the crowd, and that was who he was at the time.
Yeah, wow.
It was quite an
quite a
experience.
story.
And then the night before, he took us all, and the Pavarotti lived, in between Maranello and Modena, had a restaurant, and we all had dinner there with Pavarotti. It was an unbelievable Ferrari Italian experience. That was true. That was the 50th anniversary.